Welcome to My Forever Home, the podcast. I'm Frances Cosway and I've helped hundreds of people create forever homes. I can't wait to share the journey with you. So let's start. Hello and welcome to this episode of My Forever Home, the podcast, the sustainability series. Today we're on episode 3 and we're talking about changing consumption habits with Sally Flower from Home Sanctuary. Now, last week I had Sally from Home Sanctuary on the show talking about decluttering mindfully and in a sustainable way. And this week I've asked her back so we can chat about how to change the way we consume. And even last week when we were talking about decluttering in a sustainable way, we also touched on the fact that it's how you consume that impacts, and it's almost like a full circle. So I really wanted to be able to chat to Sally about that in terms of changing the way we are consuming and our consumer habits. It's something that I talk to my clients about all the time. And when I heard Sally talk about the very similar philosophy in her workshop, I knew we were aligned and wanted to bring her on the show so that we could share with you about choosing smarter and also more sustainably when you purchase. Now, Sally is the first Australian trained Marie Kondo in the famous KonMari method. She also holds a Master of the Environment from Melbourne University, and is a wellness consultant, mindfulness coach, and sustainability advocate. Her biggest motivation is climate change, and she's passionate about changing the way we purchase, minimising her environmental footprint, and helping others to do the same. Before starting her business, Sally spent 8 years in corporate finance, including a period working on Wall Street. And it was in New York that she met Marie Kondo and established a deep passion for mindful living. Home Sanctuary is built on the solid foundation of her love for the environment, and you'll hear that passion come through today, and her passion for reducing consumerism, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Through one-on-one consults, workshops, and events, Sally helps Australians to lead meaningful lives in nurturing homes with less. Sally's goal is to change the way we purchase, to motivate and help our community to make purposeful choices that inspire us to live as the best version of ourselves, which is inspirational in itself. Welcome to the show, Sally. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be back again. This series
that's good. It's
such
lovely
a good
to have
one.
you here. Yeah, well, look, it was so great to chat to you on the last episode about decluttering in a sustainable way. And I really hope that people are now going away and thinking about decluttering in a completely different way. Having a really clear objective, have really clear expectations, and really being well planned. It's not just something you can do on a whim.
No, exactly. Planning out what you want to declutter is the same as planning out what you buy. It needs to be done consciously.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because I think it goes hand in hand, which is what we did touch on last time, that it does go hand in hand. You sort of really can't have one without the other. So when you presented in your workshop, when I met you earlier in the year at a trade show, you mentioned something that really resonated with me, and it stayed with me ever since. And actually, every time I've gone to purchase something, I've thought about this. And it was, whenever you buy something, we need to consider the resources it's used in its production and the waste you will create at purchase, not at the donation stage. I think that's such a profound statement, and it really sunk deep for me. And now every time I'm at the shops going to buy something, I think about, so how is this actually going to be discarded at the end of its life? So that leads me to the very, very first thing I want to ask you. What are the key tips for when someone is buying something new with that statement in mind?
Yeah, it's music to my ears that's kind of the thing you think about for every purchase, because that's how we all should be thinking when we purchase. That we tend to think of the waste when we get rid of a product, where we really need to think about the waste up front. As soon as you take ownership of an item, you're then responsible for it. So that kind of goes in when every time you do buy a new item, you really need to be thinking about what's going to happen at the end of its life cycle, what's going to happen during its time with me, and how did it get to me? Kind of like 3 steps to simplify it. Like, how did it get to me means, can I consume something that has limited impact in construction? So is this using raw materials or recycled materials? How much packaging is on this item that can't be reused? Who made it? Like, who is actually benefiting from this purchase? Is it being benefited by the big retailer, or is it a bespoke item made by with craftsmanship? Are they correctly paying their staff for it? Has it been made outside of Australia for the purpose of cheap labor and no limited environmental damage costs? So how did it get to me is a big one. And then it's life with me. Like this life with me that this new product's going to have, is it going to be really well used? Or is it just something that I kind of want a bit of a hit, a bit of a buyer's purchase benefit? Does
Dopamine.
it got, yeah, a bit of, a bit of
Bit of
dopamine.
dopamine.
Yeah. Is this something that is going to be working well with everything else I have? Like, is this actually going to fit in with my home and fit in with my lifestyle? Does it have multi-uses? Do I have something at home that could already make this use of this thing already? And if I buy this, do I then have to upgrade everything else around it? This is the author, the philosopher that made this, actually, the mind escapes me. Oh no, the Detroit effect, where something that you bring in a new item into your home and it feels like it's new and clean and shiny and fresh, then you have to replace everything else around it. So you need to think about that kind of fallen effect of this new item. And then lastly, when I no longer want this item, what am I going to do with it? Is it high enough quality to donate? Is it going to be recyclable? Can I upcycle it? And what's like its shelf life with me? Am I going to have it for a long time? It feels like a lot when you kind of are walking through a supermarket or a store, or you're shopping online, to think about this stuff all the time. And we now have services that can do it for us. We can shop in eco stores, and there's some ways and some really good forums out there that provide advice on how you don't have to think so much about where this item came from. If it's like a trusted marker or a trusted online store that has done the research for you, that can kind of make it easier. But it's really vital that we think about the life before, this life with us, and the life after we have it, for everything we bring into our homes, because it stops us in our tracks a lot of the time.
Well, I was just thinking, as you were going through that list, and as I heard it when I did in March, when I met you and heard you speak, it does stop you in your tracks. Because when I've gone into stores now and I'm thinking, am I looking at this as a dopamine hit when you go shopping for fashion or whatever it is? And then I started looking at T-shirts and going, well, how many T-shirts do I have? Do I really need this? How many liters of water have been used to actually make this T-shirt? And if I think about denim, that's just, so bad for the environment when you're thinking about denim. And then I am thinking about, how is it going to be discarded? So I wasn't even thinking about the 5, because I didn't have the 5 in the top of my mind. It was just the few things that you mentioned that were in my head at the time, as I now go looking for things, or, am I just looking, or do I really need it? So it's really, and when I did, and I'll take it back to a personal experience, when I did the 10-day challenge that you had, and we talked about that briefly in the last episode, and I started decluttering some of my drawers, and I just started yoga, and I thought, oh, well, I need to go out and buy a whole new yoga outfit, even though I ran and I did a whole lot of other different things. And I thought, and I decluttered my drawers, and I thought I was embarrassed at how many pieces of activewear I had, which I don't wear anywhere else but when I'm doing active activities. But it was like, I don't need to buy specific yoga things, and a lot of these things I can wear. But when I actually decluttered and I saw how much stuff I had that just hadn't been stored in a way that I could see it really clearly, one, I realized I didn't need to buy anything. And but it also made me embarrassed that I had so much. But it was great that once I decluttered, I realized I didn't need anything else. So I didn't need to go searching for things that I didn't need. And I think it's the dopamine hit.
Yeah.
So it's just if people were thinking consciously every single time they went to buy things on lots of different levels, even from a fashion perspective, cost per wear. Am I just buying this to wear once, or am I really going to get masses and masses of wear out of this particular piece? I think it will change things dramatically.
Oh, it would, and it can, and it does. There is, if, for clothing fashion in particular, changing the way that your relationship with your wardrobe. There's Courtney Carver is a minimalist, and she wrote Project 333, and she has a really cool book on revisiting the relationship we have with our clothes, especially as women, and not just women nowadays. Like, we have this body image kind of problem and all over our community. And the other thing to think about with that is that we are the product of being sold stuff, right? So when you mentioned there, I just started yoga, so I thought I needed a new yoga outfit. That's because we are the advertising product. Like, we get 3,000 advertising messages every day, and they are targeted at us because we now have algorithms that know what stage of life we're in. They know what we like to click on. They know what our friends like. We know that, and there are experts, behavioral psychology experts, who create these tools and have paid thousands and millions of dollars to be able to pinpoint and target us with advertising of products that we're then told that we need. It's actually a lot of effort to bring ourselves out of that state and back to our own being, because we do get constantly bombarded with information of, if you have this, you'll feel more like you're part of the team in the yoga studio because you're also wearing Lululemon, or you'll feel like you're more at home in Armidale if you're wearing Nimble activewear. For those listeners in Melbourne, you'd understand that reference. But it's like, what? That's so not true. Like, I just need to pull myself up and come back to myself and my center and realize that I only know what's going to make me feel better. And we know from the hedonic effect that purchasing, you will always come back down to your base level happiness. So what happens with this dopamine hit of purchasing is that you go up in a level of happiness. You get this bit of a spike, new shiny thing, like, yay, new car, new whatever, new yoga outfit. But then you will always drift back to your baseline happiness. If that wasn't true, we'd all just do one shot to Chadstone and we'd all be the happiest beings on earth. And I can guarantee that when you walk around the streets of our cities, that's not what's making us happy. The relationship we have, our friends and our family, and how we are in relation to our peers and how we sit within our society makes us happy. So that kind of brings us into this discussion of affluence, this affluent treadmill that Australia is just skyrocketing, in that we have access to abundance. We are a very wealthy nation, and we have a pretty robust social safety net. So we're not going to kind of fall back and not be supported. But it does mean that we get paid well, we have access to stuff, and we can kind of put it in our homes, because we all have larger homes in most countries. So we're on this affluent treadmill where we're purchasing to keep up with each other. And so if my next door neighbor gets something more, I want something more. It's kind of, it used to be called keeping up with the Joneses. And we know that happened in the 50s when we're comparing people to our people we live with our street. And then when the women started to go to work, we started to compare ourselves to our peers that we work with. And now we compare ourselves to the Kardashians on Instagram. Side note, there's a really good studies to show that the amount of waste and consumerism driven by the Kardashian branding.
Don't even start me on the Kardashian thing. As soon as those words come out of my kids' mouths, it's just like,
So we're now compared to a completely different cohort that's out of reach. So we actually have to get ourselves out of that circle. And whether it's like a technology detox, whether it's giving yourselves 50 days no purchasing, whether it's not going for a coffee in the mall, it's going for a coffee down on at the a takeaway coffee for a walk in the park or whatever. It's really, we have to actually remove ourselves from the societal pull to consume, because we have at the moment a model of measurement, GDP, that measures our success based on purchasing and output. Economic growth, right? And we also, so much of what we do, we compare our success to how much money we have in our bank account or how much money we're earning in comparison to our peers and our colleagues. And that was a really big thing for me when I first started my business. I was constantly comparing myself to other businesses until I realized, whoa, I just need to like compare myself for my success. Like I can't constantly be comparing that way. So until we kind of reverse the way, we actually have to start to reverse the way that we measure our success, because if we continue with this GDP, consumerism output, which doesn't calculate in environmental damage. So all the products that we consume in Australia do not calculate how much water is used, they don't calculate how much carbon is used, and they don't factor in how much waste is created at that product. It will change, it is changing. We are going to get a carbon market, we are going to get regulations around how much, you know, a waste is produced per item. But until then, the environmental cost is not factored into the items that we buy. So we have to do it ourselves.
And that's exactly right. And I think there's a couple of things that you've mentioned that really that I really want to pull out, actually. And one is the keeping up with the Joneses. And I think that this is it's dangerous territory. And I actually still refer to that saying, keeping up with the Joneses, with a lot of my clients. And that is really driven by, don't worry about what anyone's doing down the road or what your friends are saying about the things that you're choosing for your home, because they're not going to live in your home. So we need to, and it gets back to your point about choosing things that really resonate with us and not about this treadmill of just constantly trying to keep up. But when people, I just find that when people are choosing things for their home, hard materials and, oh, but what's everyone else going to think about it? Well, forget about everyone else. It goes back to your thought about your business. It's like, you're doing this for yourself. You're spending all this money. Just choose things that make you happy and not what Joe Bloggs down the street is doing and what his opinion is about your home, because he's not living in it. Yeah. So that was one thing. And the other thing that it's the exposure to all the things that you're talking about. It's the exposure to social media. It's the exposure to all the advertising in the magazines and on TV and everything else. And it's really interesting because when I lived overseas, I lived in Slovenia for a time, and this is, 25 years ago, before they were in the EU. And what I loved about living in Ljubljana was the simplicity. Shops weren't open on a Sunday. It's a very tiny city anyway. But people were always in nature. We're going up for a hike up the mountain, and they weren't really interested in magazines. They didn't have a lot of retail stores, and they actually weren't that interested. And when I removed myself from all that media, I was so much happier. And so now I make a conscious decision. Don't walk into the shop. Don't look at the magazines, because if you're not looking at it, you're not missing anything. Or
totally.
even not as you feel that you're missing something, but actually you're not. And so I found the best way to not have that, I'm not, whatever it is, it was like, just remove yourself from any of that stimuli. And you're so much happier.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned, the last thing I wanted to mention about what you've just talked about is, this carbon society and the GDP, and everything's measured on economic growth, which is dangerous in itself. But there are now measures in place, and I know offline I talked to you about this, about green tag, and this is going to be an episode 5 of the sustainability series. I have got an entire episode dedicated to green tag accreditation. And that is talking exactly what Sally's just mentioned now around having products where you can measure what their waste is. How are they recycling their waste? How are they recycling the end product? How are they manufacturing this? Who is manufacturing it? How are we eliminating the slavery in terms of choosing products that are not using slave labor? So green tag accreditation is one way that we can be a lot more conscious about what we're buying by using a green tag credited product. And I use this in many, many of the materials that we're specifying for clients, but now it's also at a consumer level. For products that but I don't want to talk about it too much, because there's a whole episode dedicated to this. And that is exactly what you say, Sally, around there are resources that we can use that take that thinking away for us. They've already done that for us, which makes our decision-making process so much more simple. Let's go back to the fast fashion, because I think fast fashion is a really big problem. And the impact on the environment, our lust for fast fashion is just never ending. And I think, I see brands like Shein, you get a top for $5. And I even see my kids, They're like, oh, but I can get a handbag for $3. I said, yeah, but at what cost? Who's made that product? It might cost $3 for you, but who's paid that? Someone has paid the price for that along the line. So I'm really educating my kids about, yeah, well, it may only be $3, but someone else has paid the price for you to get it for $3. So I see it in interiors too, and I actually call it fast fashion interiors, that the mindset is, if it's cheap, there's no inherent value placed on the item. So, oh, I can throw it away. It doesn't matter if I got it at Kmart and I got a side table for $15 and it's temporary, because I can just chuck it out. But the cost is it's going to go to landfill, and the cost is obviously the environment. So
the fast, sorry, do you have a question?
No, go on. So I just wanted to get your thoughts, your commentary on the fast fashion.
Yeah, I think the fast fashion and fast fashion, fast homewares, that's what you're calling it.
Fast fashion interiors, I call it.
Fast fashion interiors.
I've coined that. That's my own label. Fast fashion interiors.
I like it. I mean, there's two elements to it, right? So definitely we know that a lot of waste has been produced by the fashion industry, and Australia is horrendous at this. There's a really cool fact that's made by this company called Earth Day Overshoot, which is the day where the planet starts consuming more resources than it can make. So for Australia, that day's in March. So from March onwards, we're consuming resources that the planet can't make. So we need, if everyone in the world lived like Australia, we'd need about 5.2 planets. So
it's embarrassing. It embarrasses me.
Worse than America, and we're worse than Germany and Switzerland and the UK and China. We're terrible. So we're absolutely horrendous. You can't think that Australia can sit back and not worry about this. We need to. But I'm not a fan of labeling brands good or bad because of the way they're produced. Because as a consumer, you still have a response of how you choose and how you use that product in your home. So you may have items from cheaper stores that you still have intentions of using for a long time, and you have intentions of really enjoying in your space. Just because you are a wealthier member of society doesn't mean that you are able to make more conscious decisions by purchase everything that comes from a responsible consumerism. Like if you can buy something, even if it's from a cheaper brand, but you know that you're going to be using it for a long time, you're going to be responsible for when you let it go, that's okay. It's your conscious decision of how you buy it.
Yeah, sorry, keep going.
Just because something is worth $500 and not $50, yes, inherently, sometimes we would always add more value to the $500 product, meaning we would keep it for longer and use it for longer. But sometimes that secondhand item for $20, or that even if it is from a high fashion interior store for $50, you may still really use that and look after it and love it for a long time. So you don't have to move to Byron Bay, wear flax linen and live in an eco cottage to be a sustainable consumer. You can just change some fundamental ways that you buy. But if you're buying from the cheaper stores because you want to have turnaround every few months, that's not cool.
And I completely agree with you. And I'm glad that you've, because I probably wasn't very clear with what I said before, and I'm really glad that you've clarified and really talked about that point. You don't need to necessarily spend a lot of money. It's the intention behind the purchase that I think matters. It's the part of, and it doesn't matter where it comes from or how much it costs. It's my definition with the fast fashion interiors is, regardless of what it costs, I'm not really going to have it for a long time. I'm regarding it in my mind as as fast fashion. I'm not going to have it. It's not going to be really valued by me in any way. It's disposable in my mind when I'm purchasing it, and that's the difference. So it's that intention. And look, conversely, I had someone that had, was able to afford quite expensive furniture, but their mindset was still, well, I'm not going to have it for very long. I'm going to
Totally.
chuck it anyway. And I was like, but why wouldn't you just get it recovered? And it wasn't about the cost. It was about the mentality.
Yeah.
It's disposable in my mind.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it cheap, not from a monetary perspective. It doesn't have any value in your mind. And that is the danger.
So I think a lot of that comes from, like, if you think of like my grandmother, for example, she kind of didn't have a lot of money and she lived in a migrant community. Not that she was a migrant, but she came from a farming town to Melbourne and in the migrant community out in Yarraville in the 40s and 50s. And so she kept everything and wouldn't throw anything away because she was making sure that she made the best use of everything because she didn't have a lot of money. And that kind of thought process of keeping items and making the most use of it has almost been allocated with that demographic. So then as we've become more of a wealthy society, being able to show that you can buy and throw away and buy new and throw away becomes almost a status level. So I have a member of my family my extended family, who does that. They will buy a new house and they'll throw all the furniture out and buy new stuff because they associate that with their level of status and how they see themselves, because they have positioned themselves, and that's how they kind of value their how successful they've been in life. So we really need to think about how these external influences then changing the way that we view products and consume them to position us within our societal ranks.
And I mean, that just goes into a whole lot of other things, but really what you said right at the start was we've got to align everything to our own values. But I think just opening up the conversation so people are mindful, it goes back to that exact statement that you made around when you're buying something, it's looking at all the different elements, not just, well, I'm buying this to add to my status, or I'm buying this for whatever reason. It's really looking at the whole picture and then aligning it to your values. And there are going to be many people that it's not part of their value, that they're really caring about the environment.
Totally.
But I think that it's changing. Yes. And I think that there's a lot more movement in it, and particularly with the younger generations, it is a big deal. My kids are 11 and 12, and it's massive for them. It's absolutely huge. And they do think about the ongoing cost, and I'm not from a monetary perspective, but the cost on the environment. They really consider that now. So sorry, you were going to add something else.
I was just going to add there, we do a lot of this behavior change response in climate change transition. I also work as a climate change consultant, and when we look at how we support communities and economies transition to a decarbonised future, sometimes the value proposition isn't strong enough. We need to be able to adjust our habitual behaviour, and habitual behaviour is generally changed by a trigger. So something kind of struck us or stops us in our tracks for our day-to-day behaviour to encourage us to take a different path. So kind of like what we touched on before, that we will have carbon and waste calculated into the price of the product that will almost be done for us. But there are behavioral steps that you can take, so you're not putting yourself in that position and you're kind of striking yourself with this, like, oh my gosh, that's right, this is changing the way that I consume, even if it's not a value. So it's kind of like detoxing, kind of unfollowing all those posts that aren't really adding value. It's removing yourself from those mailing lists. It's thinking about, kind of like what we talked about in the last show, about rather than glorifying throwing away, glorifying space. So rather than glorifying the expense of an item, maybe we start to glorify how much you love it. Just those parts of the behavior that will need to be adjusted in order to change the consumerism patterns. And
it will take time, but I do feel positive that particularly the younger generations, I mean, you're a lot younger than me, but your generation and younger are really attuned to this a lot more than the older generation. as a generalization, of course. So, and just on the grandparents thing, it was really, I think that really is inherent, that, you know, people that didn't have a lot of money, they saved, and, you know, that they kept things because, you know, it took them a long time to get those items. It was interesting, again, when I was living in Europe, and I talked to my clients about this as well, and I have spoken at many events about this, and it comes back to this element of buying quality and also buying things that you really love. But I found that in Northern Europe, particularly when I lived in the Netherlands, they placed so much value on saving and buying something really good quality, but really good design, because they knew, and even, you know, with people around my age, that it wasn't about, well, I'm just going to buy all this fast fashion interior stuff that I know I'm going to get rid of. I'm going to have less, and I'm going to save, and I'm going to then buy a really good piece that's going to serve me for maybe my whole life. Or it was just a completely different mindset. And we don't have that mindset, I don't feel, in Australia. And I talk about it a lot with my clients. And I say to them, just wait. You don't have to have everything the day you move into your new house. Live in it first. Experience your home. Really assess what you need, because what you thought you needed on a floor plan is totally different to how you're going to actually live in that space. So just pause. And I think they're quite surprised when I say to them, we're not going to buy everything at once. We're just going to, one, wait until you can afford the pieces you really love and want, rather than having a compromise and getting stuff you know you're going to get rid of anyway. But we are, and that's why I call it fast fashion interiors, because it's this instant gratification rather than waiting like our parents did and saving. And if I think of some of the things that are in my home, when I first bought my apartment in Amsterdam, it was empty. It was a shell, because I refused to buy junk, and I saved and I saved and I saved. And I bought stunning Dutch design items that I still have in my house 30 years later. And they have traveled with me to London and to Amsterdam and back to Australia. And I still have them, and I still love them. And they still mean so much to me, because I know how much I saved for them. But they are classic pieces, so they go with everything.
Yeah, we definitely do have this impatience.
Impatience.
Impatience
Yes.
has been built into our consumerism-driven capitalist society, which has had amazing benefit for the world, right? We've lifted thousands of millions of people out of poverty. We have a higher standard. Yeah, we have a higher standard of living around the world than we've ever experienced before. And we have the ability to do that because we've created things like credit. We've created things like being able to pay later. We have like lending systems that we didn't have previously, and now more and more people have access to be able to purchase that way. So there's many positive elements to it, but it's around slowing down and considering how can we use the tools that are around us, like the credit and the pay later, or checking buying things and having a look and how it would use, so that we can still, the impatience isn't causing environmental damage.
But the impatience is also economic damage to your own personal finances.
Yes,
because it's that instant gratification. And it's that whole, you know, walk away. And I teach my kids this when we're at a market or something, because we go to a lot of markets. Walk away, or if you've seen it in the shop, think about it for the next week. And if it's still really on your mind, then maybe that is something that you really love. But often when you walk away, you forget about it.
Totally.
You forget about it. So there's a good test. And you can apply that to everything you think you're going to buy. Walk away and then see how you feel about it in 48 hours.
Yeah.
So
I love
how
that.
do you suggest people can be more conscious consumers? You talked about it initially, but you know, what are some other ways that people can be more conscious about how they're going to consume, or rather not consume as much? I think we talked about much of it, but I think there's some other things.
Yeah, so the first thing is to make sure that you don't already have it.
Yeah.
I mean, we tend to have quite cluttered homes, and we have stuff around us. So, the extension lead is a perfect example. Rather than finding the extension lead in the garage, we'll just go to Bunnings and buy another one for $4. So making sure you don't already have it is a great thing to do. And decluttering helps us know what we have.
Just about to say that. Well, look at me with my yogi. I didn't need to buy anything. But yeah,
Exactly.
rather than trying to scurry around in the garage, that's a tip, and you never be able to find it. If it's decluttered, you'll be able to instantly know where to find that extension cord.
Yeah. Another one is to think about if you have something similar. So are you buying this item because you see it in front, you want a linen throw that's caramel rather than white? Do you really need it? Do you have one that's quite similar that you can use already?
That's a
That's a
great
big
tip.
thing, because we do tend to just want more, because more is what we think that, or have, our society encourages us to want more. So do you already have one that's very similar and can do the same job, really? Can you borrow it? So a borrowing society is a really wonderful antidote to the consumerism society. And we
Love it.
are already seeing some great borrowing solutions uprising in our society. Uber, perfect example. You're borrowing and sharing people's cars rather than purposely made taxis. Airbnb is also a borrowing type solution. Rather than having purpose-built accommodation, you have shared accommodation. We know some stores like Bunnings, you can actually borrow trailers and you can borrow whippersnippers. Make sure you use that.
Steam cleaners, wallpaper removers.
Exactly. Can you borrow it from your neighbors? I know in America, there's this thing called Craigslist. It's kind of like Gumtree.
Yeah.
And I hear a lot of New Yorkers say that Craigslist is their garage. So can you kind of borrow something from a neighbor? Can you buy something secondhand and then sell it again for a few dollars? Borrowing is a great solution, rather than just running down the street and buying an ice cream maker because you have a kid's show you want to do on the weekend. Put the feelers out. Who has one you can borrow?
We've even got a store near us where you could borrow cake tins. If you wanted to make a cake in a particular number of the age of your child. And I know I borrowed those rather than spending $50 on the tin that I was never going to use again. So
that's an amazing example. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it comes back to, it's not about the fact that you can financially buy it. It's, are you going to use that more than once, that you're just going to chuck it again? I love it. Libraries,
great example.
And they've been around forever.
Perfect. Yeah. Toy libraries for kids as well. I mean, those are great too. Another one is, and if you can't borrow it, can you put secondhand first? Can you buy it secondhand before buying it new? So could you put the feelers out? If you don't have access to a cool cake shop like the one you mentioned there, Frances, can you go out and buy one? Can you go to, if you need a new something or other for the home or whatever, can you try and buy one secondhand first? That's that's a wonderful way to limit waste and limit consumerism by keeping items in use and in production for as long as possible.
I think the other one that I come across quite a lot is, I need a new sofa because I don't like this one anymore. And my first question is, why don't you like it? Is it because of the fabric? Is it because it's uncomfortable? Is it because you don't like the shape anymore? And once we really get to establish what the reason is that they want to get rid of it, do you know how many times it's only been because of the fabric? Rather than they're like, oh, it's a really, really comfortable couch. I love how comfortable it is, and I don't mind the shape, but I just don't like this bright floral that I got in the 80s, and I don't like that anymore. Well, rather than throwing it and getting a new one and it's perfectly good condition, you just recover it.
That's such a great tip. Repairing and reusing is awesome.
Exactly. And I've even had clients that have had quite, sofas with a skirt on the bottom, which if you're sort of moving into a contemporary setting, it's a bit more traditional. I've been able to remodel it. We just get rid of the skirt and we can actually change the feet of the sofa, and we can change a little bit of the aesthetic, and changing the fabric massively changes the aesthetic of it. But if it's comfortable and predominantly you like the style, you just get it recovered. So I have stopped so many people having to buy a brand new sofa. So they're saving money, but the fact that then they're getting something that they love just as much without having for that to go to landfill.
So much better.
Dining chairs. I had another client who had really high dining chairs, really high back, and they were leather, and that was big in the day. And they said, oh, I want much lower ones and I want fabric. And I said, well, I think we can actually use the ones that you've got. I just get them cut down, and we can recover them in a fabric rather than a leather. She said, can you do that? I went, totally, we can. And that's exactly what we did. Perfect. And she said, I had no idea that I didn't need to buy brand new chairs because I wanted to change the shape. So there's so much that can be done. And I think it's about asking the questions too.
Yeah.
It's not
definitely.
just, and I will, if they come to me, I will I will ask the questions, but it's about asking people the questions to say, what can be done?
And I think it's, looking at your home as little bundles of resources makes you then go, oh, well, then can I just use that resource, which is chairs, and remodel it a bit. Yeah. That's a great example.
And then and I'm sure you're going to touch on this as well, that's remodeling and repurposing. I suppose there's a lot of that's big at the moment is a piece of furniture that can be repainted, or it can be sanded back and given a completely new feel and look. And that's not necessarily using fabrics, that's, your actual timbers and so forth, but also repairing things. And I think it is quite sad that a lot of items are being produced now, electronics, to have a very short lifespan. They miraculously stop working just when they're out of warranty. But really investigating and pushing, there's amazing handy people that can repair things that you may not be able to get traditionally repaired. But what can be repaired?
Well, I've actually got that on the list to think about before you buy an item. Is it repairable, or is it made? Right. Is it made to die? Really?
Exactly.
Are you buying something that if you lose a part? I remember I went to buy this beautiful Italian-made coffee percolator. Percolator, is that the right word? Yeah,
percolator.
I think so. Percolator, that's it. Coffee percolator. And one of the selling points was, if you lose a piece, we can replace it. Great. That was a selling point for me. Because I'm pretty sure that if it was one I bought in a cheaper store, that I wouldn't be able. If you lose one piece, you got to rebuy the whole thing.
It's completely disposable.
Yeah. So thinking about items that are going to be repairable down the track is really great.
And that actually leads me to when I had Rob from E&S Trading on the show in the kitchen design series. He actually told me that they will not stock brands in the store if they don't have a repair service.
I love that.
He said, because our customers are going to come back and then it becomes a bit of our nightmare. But he said, no, there are particular brands that just do not have a good repair service. And so we won't stock them. It's an awesome story. And I think that's a great question that you ask, or that people should ask themselves is it repairable? Can I get parts?
Yeah. Can I get parts? Is it repairable? Is this item going to be steam cleanable? Is it just the kind of fabric that will deteriorate in my hands? Yeah. And
there's a lot more, when I think about window treatments, so many of the curtains and sheer curtains fabrics, you had to get them dry cleaned, or they weren't washable. And the fabric houses are really changing, because so many more of their textiles are now able to be hand washed at home. They don't need to, have a specialist come around to steam clean them, and then all those chemicals and everything else. So that's becoming really, really big now, that you can actually wash all those textiles yourself.
That's actually a selling point. My partner and I have bought a new property, and our couch won't fit into the living room. It's a sunken living room with individual window pockets for the couches to sit in, and we've got one like an L shape. So we're going to sell that secondhand, and we're looking at buying another one. And a key purchase element for me is the ability to unzip and wash. Correct. Because I want to have something I can reuse and actually robustly use it, because I want to have a home where you can actually sink into a couch with a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and
Not worry about it.
Yeah, not worry about it. If you spill a little bit of something, you can pop it in the wash. Yeah. So just thinking about that as you purchase is kind of, it will limit you. And sometimes you got to ask that question up front and kind of just walk out of the store or flick off that website if you're doing some research. But it's these kind of elements that you change your behavior, and the companies are responding. Like they're giving us the ability to wash and wear, like you said. The window furnishings that you can pull down and you can clean rather than getting a steam cleaner in. So it is kind of changing so we have more control over what we can do with our purchased items.
Yeah, and look, I see it as well with more and more people asking for natural fibers.
Yeah.
And also more and more manufacturers are actually producing textiles now for the interiors industry that are made out of recycled components. That there was a brand that had carpet that was made out of recycled fishing nets. And so these things are becoming more and more paramount. But I think it's about, as you've said, it's about asking the questions up front and not afterwards, whether things are repairable. It's not when it breaks down, it's like, oh, now I need the part. You need to be prepared and ask the questions up front to make sure that you're making the right decision at the start.
Yeah, I do that with if I'm looking at any kind of textile. If it's polyester, I'm just like, nope.
Yes.
Recycled polyester, then maybe, but there's a line of up front. No, not doing that, because polyester is hard to recycle.
But it's cheap to produce. Yes. Yeah. So how do you think the whole conscious consuming and buying in a really considered and conscious way plays out in home renovations? And when you're building a new house, what sort of how do you think it plays out in that space?
Well, we know from studies done with carbon release and transition to a decarbonized economy for building homes and construction in general, that retrofitting and repairing is always better than building new. So anything that you can do to repair a home or retrofit it so it has higher eco standards, it's actually going to be much better than knocking down and building the whole thing. Because the waste created in the construction industry is the largest area in Australia. Produces more waste than anything else. At the moment, I live in central Melbourne in Collingwood, and there are constant construction around me and skips on the streets all the time. And every time a new building is built, they will rip it down and build a new one. Most of the time, sometimes they have to keep the facade for heritage reasons, but the waste produced by full demolition and construction is a lot worse than retrofitting. So anything you can do to work with a builder that will work with the materials that you already have to build to increase the standard is much better than is harder, but it's the best thing you can do. And then kind of considering exactly the same as what we said with everything else. Can I repair it? Is this weatherboards? Can I wash it down? Is it cleanable, or I'm going to have to replace it in 4 years' time? Something that's a little bit longer life standard for it. And I think you can think about a lot with a home build about trying to get the most sustainable product you can, and that is, if you have the financial backing to be able to do that, that's wonderful. But the most important things for homes in Australia in particular is limiting energy use, so making sure it is built to as high energy standards or passive standards as you can. Trying to get everything you can on electricity, because gas is a fossil fuel, despite some of the conversations that we've been hearing within the media in the last few years. Yes, and energy efficiency of the products inside the home as well. So that's the way you're going to make the most sustainable home in those areas.
Yeah, and that's all exactly the sorts of things that I would be, advocating as well. And building a sustainable home. Just going to your point about houses being knocked over and then rebuilt, I think it is such, and I'm going to say it, it's a fad almost, that people are obsessed with having to have a new house rather than renovating or seeing, you know, it's going to get hard because we're going to knock most of it down, or I'm not going to be able to have that big, massive open this or that. And it just gets a little bit more difficult. So it's easier and sometimes more cost effective to knock it over.
Yeah.
Oh, look, some of the houses I see knocked over it's just terrible, like really good homes. I think when the home is really, really beyond repair, that might be a little bit different. But there's a lot of really good quality brick homes that could be easily renovated that aren't. And I think it's this obsession with having some architecturally designed home. Again, it goes back to what we were talking about before. And I think it also comes down to the design of the home. Are we using passive solar design? You mentioned passive house. We can use passive house principles that don't necessarily cost a fortune, that don't necessarily mean you have a passive house, but you are using a lot of those principles, and some of them cost nothing to implement. And I think they're the bits, they're the things that I see really miss, that people just don't know about it, so they don't design for it. And it is around the buildings. But I think a lot of it has got to do with smart design, so that we can build smaller houses as well. The footprint is smaller, which means it's cheaper to build, but it's also much cheaper to run. I absolutely agree with you about gas.
Bigger isn't always better. I sometimes feel like if we have more space in our home, well, you know, that'll be better for us. But it's just, you know, there's some beautiful, cozy. We just bought a house. It's not big, but it's just beautiful and cozy. And I have no intention of filling it with stuff. I just want it's just a space where I can be connected with family and enjoy and be comfortable and relaxed, and thinking about what you want your house to feel and function, what you want it to do for you, and not just having more. You know, more is not better.
You said the word feel. It's one of the very, very first things we ask our clients when we are first engaged with them and we do a briefing session. The very, very first thing I ask is, how do you want to feel in your home? And it often takes them aback because they're not expecting that question. They're expecting, how big do you want it to be? Or what you know, what other things are you wanting in your home? But it's about, how do you want to feel and how does it need to work? And that comes down to smart design rather than, you know, having it bigger. You can have a really smart design and have a house that's probably quite significantly smaller, but is still going to serve you.
Definitely.
And you said it yourself, I'm not going to fill it with a whole lot of junk or things that I don't really need. I think it's comes back to all the things we've been talking about in this and the last episode, around filling our homes with things that we love, items that mean something, not things that are, you know, a fast fashion. It's I love it on this whim. It's a bit of dopamine. These are all the things that really mean something to me. These are representative of my life story.
Yeah, definitely. It's a reflection of who I am.
That's exactly right. So you've mentioned that there is now a heap of things you no longer buy. I know you mentioned that when I met you in the workshop. So share with us, what are the things that you are no longer buying? And I know you've also got a link for this, but just mention some of the things here.
Yeah, I did love that blog when I wrote it, 10 things I no longer buy. So definitely, I mean, fast fashion is off my list. So don't buy anything because I feel like it would look good, or I've just seen it. So I definitely only buy to my style. I don't buy anything just because it's on sale. I mean, that's something that's quite easy thing to like. We feel like we want to buy something because it's on sale. I will buy things on sale because I have just been waiting for the sale. I definitely will do that if it's something that I know that I need to add into my life. I will definitely
That's considered.
That's considered, right?
Considered. That's conscious.
Yeah, exactly. I won't. Sometimes some funny little ones that I won't longer buy will be that I will always untick in any time I will buy facial products or beauty products. I will untick the free samples, and I won't take free samples at this checkout counter either, because I have decluttered an insane amount of soaps, shampoos, and free samples. Because people don't really want the free samples. They want what they've used. I will take a sample if I'm testing out a product if I like it, but I don't want little plastic packets of a shampoo that I should try. I'm really confident with my shampoo bar, so I don't take the free samples. That's one thing.
That is such a good tip.
The free samples is something that I've been to many. Oh, and when you're on an aeroplane and they give you the little packet of like your toothbrush and your eye mask, I don't take that either.
No, I take that all on myself.
Because but like I have seen so many of them decluttered. So that's something that I definitely no longer buy. I could probably think of one more. I'm actually thinking what was in that list.
So the blog for the listeners is 10 Things I No Longer Buy Minimalist. And that is on the Home Sanctuary website. But I just wanted you to share a couple of those things. But the no sample thing and just mindfully not ticking it, but the mindfully waiting for something to go on sale. And I've actually taught my kids that. They'll walk into a shop and they'll be like, oh, but I really want it, Mum. And it's like, well, how much do you really want it? And why don't you wait until it comes on sale? One, you'll know whether you really, really want it because you've got to wait. And then when it comes on sale, you won't have to pay as much either.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And they are pretty mindful with that. They're pretty, one daughter's really good at it. The other one's not. The other one's a bit more, she needs the instant hit. So she's a work in progress.
I think it's really hard to influence teenagers because they're having to process so much anyway. So I think it's really hard that way.
Yeah.
Another thing I remember I've got in here is I no longer buy things just because I'm on holiday, like those holiday knickknacks, like those days are gone. I'm not going to buy something just because I want to have a memory of this moment. Like I have photos on my iPhone if I need them.
That's such a good one. And actually, it's just reminded me because you talked about something earlier and I wanted to mention something, and that's just reminded me around when you buy one thing and you've got to change your whole house around it or your whole wardrobe around it for that one thing. How many times have you been on holiday? Let's say you're in an exotic destination like Morocco or whatever it is, and you buy something from there because it looks so amazing in that setting, and then you bring it home and you're not on holiday and you're not in that setting anymore, and it is just a disaster. It just does not work. And you don't love it in the same way.
No, you don't. I reckon I would have $500,000 in my bank if I was given $1 for every Bali dress that I've decluttered with the client.
Oh, exactly.
The Bali bought it in Bali.
Bought it in Bali. It looked great in Bali, and I found great in it in Bali. But when I got back to Australia, I wasn't in Bali. It doesn't look like I'm in Bali. But it's such a common thing to do.
It is.
And it's just a waste. So that's a really good one. Be very, very mindful that when you come home, it doesn't look like you're in Bali anymore.
No, it's really doesn't really. No, it's not really a tropical setting here in Melbourne. So
correct.
No.
So true. That's a really good one for lots of different reasons. All those little knick-knack things. So, what are the two easiest things that people can do to become a more sustainable consumer?
I mean, the first thing is just not to consume. Always choose less. Yeah. And always say no, because the reality is most of the stuff that we think we need, we don't need. And the best thing we can do for the planet is to just have less and just be more comfortable with less. It's taken me I finished my master's a year ago. I've been kind of working in climate space for 18 months. I think it's taken me still 3 years to really just become more comfortable with just having less and saying no. And I see someone with something and I'll be like, oh, that would be actually really cool to have that. And then it will take me a moment to be like, no, I just need to have less and say no. So that's the best thing you can do.
And I think that takes really strong character too. It's you've got to remind yourself of your values, because we're bombarded with, as you said it before, so many messages. And I think it takes, you really need to step back and you really need to be strong to say, well, no, I don't really need this.
Yeah.
And you are going against the grain of what society is constantly bombarding us with.
Yeah.
But I think really, hand on your heart, you're going to be so much happier.
It also takes a lot of robust, caring, considerate conversations with family and friends who want to buy you things. It's taken probably 2 years for my parents no longer buy my brother and I items unless we've asked for them. We have like a birthday and a Christmas list, and they're considered items. But I'm very much someone who you shouldn't really buy anything for me unless I've asked for it. So it's also it's an element of everything that is consumed for me. I also struggle with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
And the
suppose
other
the other
part,
one, go on.
just thinking of the second thing up there, would be um, supporting businesses that are doing really well, kind of that step before we spoke of at the very start of the podcast, those 3 steps. How did the product get to me? How am I going to use it? And where's it going to go? If you can, sometimes we don't have the luxury of being able to afford the most sustainable item out there. But if you can at certain times, choose an object because it has more sustainable principles. It's always going to be better off. You don't have to do it every time. It can be quite costly, but where you can, definitely
Completely
try to do that.
agree. And as we talked about before, it's the intention with the product as well that's really important, not the financial component of it every time.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of businesses. Again, I'll go back to Green Tag. All the work's been done for you, and you can buy really, really mindfully, knowing that the manufacturing process and the way it's recycled and the way the waste is recycled is really cutting edge. So that absolutely support those businesses. Anything else? Any one last thing you want to share about giving customers listeners a sustainable consumer journey? Sorry, Sally.
Yeah, I think it's almost like we kind of have this little bit of like the newborn sustainability person is like the newborn Christian. Like, be really careful when you preach, that you're preaching in a way that you're leading by example and you're encouraging people to take on the sustainable steps that you have, rather than condemning them for not doing the right thing. Because we know that scaring people and pushing them away is not the right way to enact behavior change. It's actually by leading, for example, and explaining why you've chosen to purchase this item over another one, and not saying, oh, you shouldn't have bought that because of X, Y, Z. So definitely acknowledging that everyone is at different stages of their sustainability journey, and to lead by example and support people around you rather than condemning. That can get
I think that's a really great point, actually. And people will be on the journey when it's the right time for them.
Yes, for sure.
And also when they've got the information. I think when, information is really important. And if you're able to, if people are open to getting that information, they'll seek it out. But yeah, everyone is on a different journey, and they'll come to their own conclusions, or they'll start the journey when they're ready to start the journey, for whatever reasons that's prompting them to start that journey.
Yeah, and explaining why you've chosen to do this in a positive way rather than condemning what they've chosen to do, is a really nice way to kind of have the conversation, but without it being a negative thing.
Yeah, great advice. So where can people find out more about you and Home Sanctuary?
So definitely go to homesanctuary.com.au. There's a newsletter to sign up there. We have a 10-day challenge in our free resources section. There's videos and there's other podcasts if you want to listen to them. And there's free resources where you can declutter you can declutter items sustainably. And then I'm also on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok under Home Sanct or Sally Flower. So you just type in Home Sanct for Home Sanctuary, and I will come up.
Fantastic. And there are really amazing resources on the website. I mentioned in the last episode that I have done the 10-day challenge, and there's certainly been lots of tiny little things that I've implemented, and I'm slowly going through all my drawers. But you're right, it's a little bit at a time rather than saying one long weekend I'm going to sort my entire house out, because it's just not possible. So
Yes.
it's been an absolute pleasure, Sally. I know how busy you are, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to share your amazing knowledge with our listeners in the sustainability season. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me. I hope it resonates and people continue with their sustainability journey no matter where they are.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Sally. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of My Forever Home. If you're ready to renovate or build a new home and you need help to create a beautiful and functional forever home, you can book a chat with me directly at whitepebbleinteriors.com.au/chat. Have a great day.